This is a video of the restoration of St Peter's Cemetery in Berkhamsted, which originally opened in 1820 and still had interments being made in the 1960s. It covers some quite interesting periods of the history of the town. The pictures are taken in more or less chronological order, with headings from time to time to let viewers know what's been going on. Of course, a Heritage Lottery Fund bid is a massive document, about 50 pages long, and has to be preceded by a consultancy to prove the project is viable and that it's also sustainable financially following the completion of the restoration. So the people involved in this need to have their full credits, which will be eventually established at the end of this film. The history of the town is largely included in the Victorian part of the history of Britain between 1820 and 1960, when enormous changes happened in the world. And many of these are reflected in things you can see here. I hope you enjoy watching it, and there'll be other commentary later on. I'll now leave you with the views. Order in which the work was done is interesting because, as you can see here, the wall at the back of the car park of the Rex Apartments had to be stabilised with anchors because there were several feet of earth behind it, and in addition the north gate had to have the pillars underpinned. And then a good deal of work was done by the other walls round about to strengthen them. This is putting us, because trees had grown close to the walls and had cracked them, and that applied to the walls all the way round, both on Creek Close Lane and onto the western side. And then the southernmost end of the thing, which is to be a wildlife area eventually is being fenced off to allow the flora and the fauna to grow unchecked. There was some talk about putting sheep on it at one stage. This is the original war memorial just there, and a brand new war memorial is being built further halfway up 3 Close Lane, because there's a good many war graves in the thing, both from World War I and World War II. And as you heard earlier, Smith Dorian is buried there, the chap who was in the Boer War and also was a general in World War I. Royal Flying Corps people and so forth. Of course, a good deal of tidying up had to be done because the place had become quite derelict by the time of the 1960s, when the last interments were made of people in the Cooper family and perhaps one or two others who had family graves. There was a very extensive amount of work on doing up the gravestones, and in fact part of the Heritage Lottery Fund bid was to train stonemasons or people into stonemasonry to see how they could improve their skills and so forth like that. So a considerable amount of work. This is part of the Cooper and Cooper's Sheep Dip, the chemical company, who became Burroughs Wellcome, eventually taken over by Burroughs Wellcome. And of course the other thing was the paths were very rough and so forth. And were very slippery in the winter and quite dangerous to people. Here's some Royal Flying Corps stuff. Anyway, part of the policy was to put proper bonded paths which would be safe in bad weather, and that has been done since then, covering all the main areas and the places where there are seating for people to enjoy the surroundings and so forth. There's a picture of some of the graves that are being restored all over it. It of course has quite an interesting sort of history, because it's during the time of enormous social change in Britain. The the time the cemetery was opened in 1842, I think I might have said it was 1820, it's 1842, the Industrial Revolution in Britain was well on the way, and was making huge changes in society. A new class of people was becoming very rich, the people who were the industrialists, as opposed to the agricultural people who'd been landowners before. In some cases, of course, the landowners were making money as well, because the Bridgewater people, who owned large estates in the Salford area, were mining coal in the 19th century and made a fortune out of that, and then had the idea of bringing the coal into Manchester, 5 miles away from where the coal mines were, on the canal, the Bridgewater Canal, one of the first canals ever built in this country, although not the first canals ever, because they were Roman canals back in the west of Europe 2,000 years ago. So, oh, it's Mrs. Hewson's grave. We've spoken about that before. There's titles in the background to tell you what's happening as time goes on the various graves of interest, and of course people are now adopting graves to keep them going, even though they may not be the relatives or the descendants actually of the people who are buried there. The point was, it did oversee a huge area of change in the history of the world, not just in the thing. Through 2 world wars, of course, the rise, well, it was already going pretty strongly, the British Empire and colonialism, European colonialism all over the world, the subjugation of China to a degree was during this period. Okay, they've now bounced back now, they're becoming industrialised, the most rapid industrialisation of any country in the world. Of course, it's a huge country with over 1 billion people in it, and now we have to recognise that they're going to be a major power in the future, already are, in fact. But of course, the World War II showed the supplanting of the British Empire, its liberation of the countries within it, generally speaking all the European colonial countries, and in fact by the 2020s the European countries are beginning to understand the history of what happened then, and the consequences of it, and we're getting protests about that happening now. For example, Black Lives Matter. A large army of people, of volunteers, you see here, there's 3 of them. I don't know their names, but they're hoping that that's the sort of thing that will carry on the work after the official work has completed this autumn of 2020. Kate Campbell, the person who does the public research and so forth like that, will carry on for a couple of years, easing the new people in who are, we're hoping the volunteers will be able to run it, and they'll be able to raise enough money to be able to afford the costs of keeping it repaired over the decades to come. Anyway, now to perhaps a little bit of the background history of Berkhamsted and how this all fits in to this. There's evidence, and oh, by the way, thanks to the Berkhamsted Local History and Heritage Society, Museum Society, for providing much of the information, and a book edited about the Berkhamsted history, which gave a lot of the information about which I'm going to give you. Here's the stonemasons learning their job. There's evidence has been found of hunter-gatherers in the area. Of course, it's clean water on the chalk streams, and land where things would grow easily. Okay, farming not in that particular period, but there were evidence of hunter-gatherers in the area. But then afterwards came the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. Now, in the Iron Age, iron smelting was going on in this area, in Northwood, for example, and in fact there is an Iron Age fort on the road, New Road I think it's called, that leads off to Dunstable, and it's the sort of thing that happened in Suffolk, in Chalk Downs there. So we do have a history of the Iron Age was it 2 or 3,000 years ago, something like that. And then I don't know if there was any settlement during that particular period, probably not. But if there was, it was fairly small. And then, of course, the Romans came. Now, they did something very interesting because they built a road system. And as the economists will tell you, connectivity is everything for making people prosperous. And what happened that affected Berkhamsted, they built Akerman Street from St Albans, one of the main cities, to Cirencester, or Cirencester as it's called. And that went through Berkhamsted.
St Peter's.
Now, this became important later on, and I'll tell you why when we come to the Normans. But it did mean that Berkhamsted was then on the map. And there was evidence of Roman settlement in the area. Again, in North Church, there was a Roman villa built, which had a temple, so it must have been fairly prosperous and may have been farming in the area. So there was obviously some settlement in Roman times. How much was ordinary people, of course, would be doubtful, but they must have had service, and they would have been slaves in the Roman times, of course. Slavery is nothing new, it's still going on today in modern slavery. But we won't go into that now. So the Romans, of course, left after about 400 years, and then Berkhamsted fell into somewhat disrepair until the Saxons arrived, and there's evidence of Saxon settlement in 700 AD. And then nothing much happened. Obviously, there was some settlement then because of farming going on in the area. But when the Normans came, they beat Henry.
Relevant to the
cemetery,
the Cooper family.
Harold, sorry, not Henry, at the Battle of Hastings, and then advanced across the Thames in London, and then did the classic military tactic of outflanking them. And this is where Akerman Street came in, because they outflanked the English army by going round the Roman equivalent of the M25, crossing at Wallingford and up the Akerman Street to arrive in Berkhamsted, where they accepted the surrender of the English forces. And consequently, to secure their position there, by this time we had the Plantagenets in charge, they built a castle, I think 1086 or thereabouts, 1088 maybe, something like that. And that became a home of royalty during the whole of the Plantagenet era. In fact, the last Plantagenet to die was in 1495, almost into the Tudor period. A woman called Cecily had been a queen, I think, of some sort. Of course, the Plantagenets were a pretty vicious lot, fighting each other, putting each other's eyes out and things like that. So it was a fairly nasty period for the people in the royal family, and of course during that period all sorts of quite well-known people became associated with Berkhamsted Castle. I've had royals there, such as
actually fought in the Zulu Wars in South Africa at the turn of the
Thomas Becket and one or two other people, and the Black Prince apparently found it to be one of his favourite castles. Anyway, these people all came and went, and of course the town was there to serve the royals, and Berkhamsted became quite prosperous for all that period. Of course, when Henry VIII came on, oh, by the way, there was a huge monastery built at Ashridge, and of course that would have produced quite a sizable amount of work for the people servicing that. So we seem to be repeating the Cooper family there. Probably done that twice, I apologise if I have. So Berkhamsted started becoming popular again, but of course in Henry VIII's day they didn't. The monastery was abolished, and the thing went into decline. And in fact, although Berkhamsted's been the sort of place being the shelter where people with large houses have always lived all through the centuries, there's a whole series of large houses in Berkhamsted of evidence of that, some of which have been demolished and housing estates built on their sites. And some, in one case, Edgerton House, which was a Bridgewater establishment, eventually knocked down to build a cinema in 1938. That was a 17th century building. It was interesting, though, that between the periods of the Industrial Revolution, which made Berkhamsted rich again, there was drovers going along, driving cattle into London and so forth. And the interesting thing, the predecessors of the Goat pub was the Goat Pub then, was the place where the cattle drovers used to rest overnight and keep their herds in the paddocks on Three Close Lane. That's why Three Close Lane is named like that. So that went on for probably several hundred years, I imagine, until the canal was built. And that, of course, changed everything. With the Industrial Revolution and then the railway shortly afterwards, Berkhamsted became a very important place from the point of view of London. And London being a huge attraction, especially for the financial services. That's where people from Berkhamsted lived. And consequently, like the rest of the Chilterns, it became a popular place with very good trains and connectivity all the way to Glasgow, Inverness, Edinburgh. You can get trains to almost anywhere from Berkhamsted. It's interesting. 2.25 hours to Manchester now, and that's without the fast trains. But of course, connectivity changes, and it has with the internet. You don't need to have fast trains now. So we're building the HS2, it's going to be a white elephant because we won't need fast trains. We need trains for transport, but we don't need to move people so much. Although people still live in offices, the city centre offices are going to have to change quite a lot. And the whole thinking about city centres has got to alter. Clearly, there will have to be some sort of idea about culture and entertainment and things like that, which is the suitable thing for city centres. But the sort of thing of large office blocks and people buying expensive flats there is probably going to be a thing of the past. So that really sets the cemetery into the context of the history of Great Britain, and in some cases the history of the world, right from the first of where Marxism was born in England, and it was suited then to the English industrial style, which is one of the reasons why the Chinese had to change things and industrialise themselves. They realised they couldn't achieve the nirvana of communism without industrialising first. But that's another story, and we'll leave that for somebody else to tell. Thanks very much for listening. Bye now. Memorial. And here's some of the volunteers doing some clearing up. I'll leave you with some of the stuff that's been repeated, and I'm proposing to make another film, probably just a few minutes long, to go through the thing extremely rapidly. But the long-term view was to leave stuff for posterity in case anybody wanted to do any research and needed to look at pictures as they're coming. So eventually this shorter film, which will be several minutes long, will make it look as though it's not repeating itself, but also to show it as though one got some flavour of what happened in 2018, 2019 and early 2020 until September when the work was completed. The cemetery is going to be open to the public completely on the 1st of November in 2020. But of course the time has to be allowed for the grass to recover and things like that, and that's going to take some time. However, it won't all be recovered by November, I expect, and of course you no doubt be pleased to see things repeated several times over and over again. But I'll leave this up on YouTube for people to research it if they ever need to do that. Probably it won't be seen by anybody. But I'm used to that in my YouTube films anyway. So enjoy watching the bits that you might be seeing again, and I hope you found this an instructive story. An uprising by the people of Berkhamsted, and they stopped it. Funnily enough, when I used to live in Manchester, we used to play lots of land in the north of England, and in fact they made their money from coal in Salford, which they then brought to Manchester. Yes, this is the very southern end of the canal site. Which is still a major canal. Of course, a good deal of agricultural work was done on it too, which I forgot to mention, and that's the Saxons hut, 3 Close Lane. I've described the importance of that earlier. Some place to stay. Very narrow valley, the Bulbourne Valley, and thank you. Typical short chalk valley in the Chilterns. one of the main paths has now been restored with a proper resin bonded path which will last for 100 years or more.
It's our local park. And that's the end.
Most of the work was, of course, done during the summers. That's the beginning of the building of the volunteers' hut, which is now completed, of course, and it's in the most southern part of the thing, and it's in the area which is going to be a wildlife area, but the graves are much closer together to each other and makes it impossible pretty well to mow the grass in between them, so you can only strip it. That was one of the reasons why there was a suggestion at one time that maybe sheep will be put there, although where the sheep come from I'm not sure, but because it's the sheep area in the Chilterns. It's the border where the Council of Bridgewater gave the second 2/3 of the area that extended the cemetery in the latter part of the 19th century. Pipes for water coming to the cemetery. But the first time, at the beginning, when they needed it for doing work, we let them have water from our mains in the Rex apartments, and I think they were quite grateful for that as well. Here's showing the steepness of the valley here. That's the other side, looking northwards. And that looks southwards up to Rectory Lane, which is the entrance to the cemetery from the north. And that's the Rex apartment, of course. That's the northern side, the southern side of the Rex apartments. And the northern gate being underpinned because it was tipping over. The pillars were tipping over. Here's the detail of the pillars being put in, the anchors being put in. You're out of focus, I'm afraid. Because water was needed, as I said earlier, because they're making cement and things like that. The Rex apartments, of course, have been done up during the period that this is going on, and the back half of it now is being done in late 2020. I think it's the first time it's done since it was built in 2002, the new flats, following the dereliction of the cinema, and it was restored and turned into a luxury cinema in 2003-04, something like that, paid for by the fact the flats were then sold to people. This is Three Close Lane, looking south to the original rectory at the far end of it, at the top end of the hill. And that's the wall beside Rectory Lane with the pillars. Yes, I obviously can't spell very well there. The High Street, I think we've got a thing of Armistice Day here. Oh, it was an election going on, that's right. We had the Euro election, didn't we, something like that in 2018. Mind you, we had all voted to leave by then, so a bit of a waste of time. This is Pilkington House, the site of a former stately home, now a block of flats on the High Street. Berkhamsted. Yes, one of the famous sons of Berkhamsted, or two famous sons in the literary field, is Cowper, the poet, and of course the chap who wrote Our Man from Havana and other novels, who was a Berkhamsted, son of a Berkhamsted head teacher. And Cowper himself, I think, was at Berkhamsted School, or he was a teacher there, or something like that. This is the festival being held on the cemetery, and showing the various events going on. Of course, that's temporarily stopped during the COVID-19 period. And in fact, the cemetery had to be closed during that period, although work carried on from April onwards, just to be careful, and also to make sure that people didn't fall over on the slippery paths before they'd been restored properly. As I said earlier, the cemetery will be opened on the 1st of November 2020. That's a new path now, that is. Up towards the south end. That's the Ashland Estates you can see there. And various views across the valley. It's nice when it's sunny in Berkhamsted. Of course, we're getting changing in the weather these days. Yes, Ashland's up Three Close, the top end of Three Close Lane, Highfield Road, and that's looking north. Again, looking north. Three Close Lane on the right. And this is the new War Memorial, with the support of the British Legion, who used to look after the old one. And here's one of the volunteers attending to graves. So the new memorial is quite an elaborate thing. It shows how the grass was carved up by all the work done on it. That's where the site of a footpath there. That seat on the left there has been replaced by a concrete seat, and in fact the peace seat, they call it, which they had a public subscription for, is on the north end of the park, roughly just at the back of the Rex apartments, probably towards the end of this view. Oh, there's again another picture of the War Memorial. Well, that's the new car park in Berkhamsted, which has been argued about by a great many people. This Rectory Lane, that little house has been built over several years. It's still not occupied. It's an extension to the houses on High Street. Thought it was interesting because it's on the entrance to the going into the actual cemetery. Another picture of the Saxons house. There's a museum inside that now, small one. Oh, that's the volunteers' hut. That's now been completed, and they'll use that as their base when the cemetery is open to ordinary people. A lot of fine trees in the cemetery, including yews, of course, like all cemeteries have, and a good deal of arboricultural work has been done, plus new trees planted to succeed. Well, that's an earlier view of the volunteers' hut. There's a huge log in this area of the volunteer, which has been there is the log. It now had seats put into it, looking back onto the I think that's Pheasant Close on the Ashlands estate. Lots of it had to be cordoned off as well, even from the people working in there, just for safety's sake. Preparing of hearth. This side of the wall. Quite a lot of big equipment had to be used. Quite a lot of earth had to be shifted about. Ah yes, here's the marching during Armistice Day. Big issue, and of course our friends from the British Legion will be there in that. And we had all the forces. This is near the church, near the old marketplace actually, which was knocked down. The cemetery was then closed. And there's the tiny house again. Oh, that's an earlier picture of it. Hadn't got the windows in then. Hadn't got the windows at this picture here. And that was the caution notices we had to have because of the weather, hazardous conditions. Yeah, so they're the Rex houses on the left there, and That's the northern end of the cemetery, and the peace seat is in the distance there. It's all underneath the tree. There's a pathway leading up to it. New pathway has been built since that was there. A lot of work went on there, all over there, throughout 2020 as well. Took these shots a good many times over there, look a bit.
26th afternoon 2019. Cemetery is closed because of construction work. This is some of it. It's become very slippery. The equipment has really carved the paths up.
In the distance there, you could see cars going down 3 Close Lane. This was the money raising for the peace seat. It was they took over a shop in the High Street for it, and that's a model of the peace seat.
A dull November.
This is where it goes. There's a picture of it, I think, later on. I was allowed in for doing that, because nearly all these pictures were taken through the gate or over the wall, and I hardly went in there because of the safety measures. So it's sensible I didn't go in, but I was able to cover most of it from various venue points all the way round. And back of the new houses built on an orchard which had been up there at one time. Large houses costing £1 million each they were, on the west side of the cemetery. Oh, sorry about that, I didn't cut that off early enough. That showed how muddy it got. Cut up. Oh yes, Highfield House, a house long demolished, one of the big houses from the Children's I told you about, to the east side of the cemetery. Here we are doing work on the underpinning again. This is earlier work in the north thing. Oh, there's a picture from my window. We're back onto the cemetery. That's looking into the yew trees just over the car park, and is the gate to the north gate again. And all the work done on about being the build the path. I'm getting well into 2:20 now. I'll cut you off it, don't worry. And all the bands which just shows how you can understand why it got so cut up with the amount of heavy equipment that was used all over it. And that's what it looks like now, or beginning to look like now. Beautiful work. This is next to the southern gate and the steps down to the new War Memorial. That's the Saxons hut again, doing the work on the road, the pathways there. Again, showing the amount of carving up that had to be done and preparation with the base for the pathways. Pathways are strong enough for vehicles to travel along if necessary, because they're not very wide, so they're meant for walking on rather than the vehicles, but no doubt vehicles will have to access the cemetery from time to time to do maintenance work. This is the southern gate, I think, yes. No, I was wrong there, that's the northern gate. again. A good deal of this gravel and earth had to be wheelbarrowed up the hill. Quite a lot of people spend quite a lot of time doing that. I saw them a number of times. Whether they're on the film I can't remember, but there's certainly a good deal of work was doing like that. That regular truck was there quite often, and it had to be mowed regularly. Nice picture of the bricks on Three Close Lane. And the road to Highfield House. Oh, long gone, of course. One of the contractors' vans. There was also a stonemasonry company who did the training of the stonemasons. Quite a lot of ironwork there for doing various structural work. And this is the War Memorial again in its early stages. Now another picture of the steps of the War Memorial. Lottery Fund makes sure it gets plenty of knowledge. Anyway, that's me for a bit. There'll be another cemetery in a moment. With the coronavirus pandemic expected to last for upwards of 6 months or more, work will be stopped for some time, and it's not now expected to be completed until probably the spring or even the summer of 2021. So I don't think you need any more commentary from now, because I'll leave you to watch the things as they go along. I think it's self-explanatory with the subtitles, which are here every so often, and I hope you found this interesting and useful, even though it is quite long, and maybe for most people the short version, which I've mentioned several times before, will be the sort of thing that perhaps interests you most. There's several more minutes of this, probably about 10 or something like that, and I think the subtitles will tell you as much as you really need to know. So I'll say farewell. Hope anybody who's doing research has found this a useful introduction, and my apologies for actually saying things twice over, because the thing was filmed over a period of over 2 years, and sometimes you put things in twice without realising that you've done so. So that's it now. Thank you for watching, and keep safe, and thank you very much for watching. Bye now.